This show's been brought to you by Anarchy Wear. They are a great organization who sells clothing, banners like what's behind me, hats, all kinds of stuff. And they're absolutely amazing. Not only do they put out awesome content, they also make awesome things like this. And if you're a Spooner fan, you have this. Let me stand up. I didn't sign shit. Lysander Spooner. If you're a Spooner fan, you'll totally understand. If you're not a Spooner fan, get in my DMs and I'll let you know, because he's one of the greatest to ever do it. This flag behind me, enemy of the state. Man, that's Murray Rothbard, the greatest to ever do it. I'm a Rothbardian. He is my favorite economist. He is my favorite anarchist, libertarian, whatever you want to call him. Fantastic material that he's put out. I highly recommend you read his books, but Anarchy Wear has everything from bold to cute and modest. You know what I mean? So like, check them out at Anarchy Wear on X, aka Twitter, at anarchywear.ca on anything meta, being Facebook and or Instagram. They're awesome. I love those guys. They're doing great things, and I highly recommend you follow them and get some goods from them, man. I love everything I have from these guys, and they're amazing. And let me throw this in for you. If you use promo code BudsNReality, Buds, letter N, reality. I know you know how to spell. If you're watching this show, you're pretty smart. I know you are. Anyways, get at them, get yourself some gear. And if you use the promo code BudsNReality, you will get yourself 15% off. Who doesn't like a deal? So get at them, check them out. They are great, awesome people. Thank you for the sponsor, and let's get on with the show. Welcome to the BudsNReality Show. I'm Sean Collins, the guy with a lot to say, and I'm here this week with Mr. Scotty Boman. And for those of you who don't know who Scotty Boman is, he is one of our LPMI like head people. I want to say you're like one of our head people, even though you might not carry a title like that. You definitely carry the Unity Caucus, which is amazing. I'm glad you're doing that, by the way. You know, especially from a dude who is saying, you know, I don't need 19 caucuses to tell me that freedom's the greatest way. I'm down with the Unity Caucus just for the name in itself. So, man, what's good, brother? How are you?
All right. It's good to be on the show. Thank you for giving me a chance to spout my angle on all this.
Absolutely, man. So, you know, I did a show with Ben DeYoung a couple weeks ago where we talked about libertarian infighting, especially within the state of Michigan, where it is very prevalent and relevant and all the things above. There's a lot of eyes on us right now, and they're not good eyes. They're laughing at us. They're pointing at us. They're saying, "What the fuck are you guys doing?" You know, this is what we're getting from outsiders from outside of Michigan. You know, but you are somebody who you had the Unity Caucus, correct?
Yeah, I started it, at least the one in Michigan. I didn't realize there was another Unity Caucus that sprouted up elsewhere, and apparently that's been growing as well. But yeah, I got this little thing going in Michigan.
And I totally dig that, and I respect that. And one of the big qualms that I had with the show I did with Ben was it seemed one-sided. So, you know, there were a couple of names thrown around, you know, when it came to you should have somebody else on the show to talk about the situation, and yours came up. And to be quite frank, as soon as that rebuttal to my tweet came up about my show, you know, that you need to have somebody from the other side come talk about this, your name was the first one that popped into my head. Honestly, dude, like, I respect you. I love what you're about, and I love what you're doing. I think you're a great person, and I think you're great for the cause. So, like, thank you for doing this and giving us your time. But like, let's dig into this, because this is a disaster. And it's not only a disaster in our state. Like, let me make that very clear right now. This isn't just a Michigan issue. There are many other states that have the same issues that Michigan has within the Libertarian Party, but it's not as insane per se as it is here. Like, there's a big court battle going on here, and it's really gross in my opinion. And we have to get back to what's important, and that's liberty. So, let's give us your side of what is happening here in the state of Michigan.
Okay, well, it goes back to you see, they're originally sort of the catalyst that got it all rolling, as far as division, was a lot of people were feeling a little blindsided by the tactics of members of the Mises Caucus, who are part of who are also members of the Libertarian Party of Michigan, who were able to, well, for instance, at the delegate selection convention before the last national convention that we had here, they were able to vote as a block, and to everyone's surprise, and able to just get their people in, and apparently no one else. But as it turned out, a lot of those people didn't actually end up making it to national, and a lot of us that were initially not voted in as delegates got in. So a lot of people were upset at first, but afterward I thought about it, when and even afterward at that convention, and I even talked to other people that were in the Mises Caucus who were voted in or were part of that whole vote, and I had to concede that, what, you guys had great tactics, and that's why you got in. You did it by the rules. I don't like the outcome. I don't like the attitude of shutting out people who have been part of this party for a long time, and just and a lot of people I think were kind of like temporary members, if you will. They were members, but a lot of people I think were coming in just to be able to be delegates with no other thing. But again, that doesn't violate the rules. They did it on the timeline and everything. So in a sense, I was like, I guess in a way I was kind of thrown, because I was feeling a bit too entitled and thinking I'd been around forever and just taking for granted that I would be voted in as a delegate. So that was, a little bit of a rude awakening, but nonetheless, they weren't really breaking the rules. They just surprised people. People felt blindsided. So fast forward then over to the national convention. And of course, there were a couple big votes. There were officers who got in, and a lot of the officers were endorsed by that caucus. But a lot of the people that actually finally got in as delegates to the national convention were longtime people that weren't necessarily part of the caucus. And in fact, the convention chair was automatically in, Tim Yao, and for the Michigan delegation, who's also the state party chair. That's how it would work. And he was there. We all voted on these things, and there were two amendments that some people started, and it seemed like every step of the way, all these people kept threatening to quit, which to me is the absolute wrong thing to do if you're concerned that the party that you claim to value so much is going in a direction you don't like. If you're going in a direction you don't like, don't quit, recruit. That definitely is not, where the Mises Caucus came from? They had a bunch of libertarians who didn't like the direction the party was going in, and look what they did. That's what you're supposed to do. Recruit people who support you and agree with you and get them in there. So, but nonetheless, I didn't necessarily like the tactics, but I had to admit they were following the rules. And when we got to the national convention, again, I didn't agree with them on two things that they had voted on. There were two national platform planks that were especially notable. One of them was to remove the abortion plank, which was somewhat neutral, but effectively said, well, that the government should stay out of it because it's a matter that, and in fact, I remember when it was first being put in there or being debated on a previous occasion, actually, it may have already been there, the platform, there was an overhaul of the platform in between what I'm describing now and the most recent national convention. So I can't really say it was put in there back then, but I do remember one person arguing for it, John Kuhn, a prominent Michigan libertarian from back in the day, had got up and said, what, if libertarians can't agree on this issue, why in the heck do we even think that we should let the government decide for us? So that's basically my attitude about that plank. Nonetheless, it got removed. And it effectively said, the government stay out of it, but we don't necessarily, we can disagree on this. But they just had it removed. Okay. Not that big a deal because it was sort of a neutral thing anyway, though in a way, saying keep the government out of it is a big deal. I mean, in a sense, we could say that about everything. And that would still seem to be the most libertarian position to take. But nonetheless, it was a missing plank. It wasn't a plank in favor of government involvement. It just wasn't mentioned. Then the next thing came along. There was a vote on the racism related plank, or the anti-discrimination plank, and it had language in there where at one clause says something to the effect of, we find racism to be both irrational and repugnant. And those were the two adjectives, the exact adjectives. And a lot of people seem to have a problem with that. And I didn't seem to have a problem with it, because it seemed to me that racism is irrational and repugnant. And a lot of other people felt like it was, and even people who were voting to change it were saying, well, yeah, it's irrational and repugnant, but it's a thought crime. And I'm like, what do you mean by that? And they're like, well, if you're a racist, you don't necessarily violate anyone's rights. You're not necessarily, initiating force. You just have some really ridiculous attitudes. But so what? You have ridiculous attitudes. You have a right to ridiculous attitudes. I'm like, well, I'm not saying no one has a right to be, like you don't have a right to be a racist. No, you can be a racist. Our party, it seems inconsistent with our overall approach to government that we would have this hang up. Nonetheless, that got reworded, and the rewording wasn't bad. I mean, the rewording, actually, I believe, was penned by Spike Cohen. And okay, we have our former vice presidential candidate. That gives him creds. As far as the topic of discrimination, he's Jewish and his wife is black. So it's hard. You can hardly call Spike Cohen racism friendly. So okay, I saw the new language. The new language wasn't bad. That got voted in. Well, a lot of people, and then I thought, then we still had these resignations afterward. Tim Yao, and he was not part of the Mises caucus. And actually, I didn't even learn that to the national convention, because he seemed to get along so well with people who were. He went and said he's resigning, and it was weird because it turned out when we had voted on that abortion plank or whatever, he actually stated that in his opinion he was pro-life, anti-choice, if you will, on that matter, or anti the government allowing it. And that surprised me, because I was thinking, okay, so what was your problem? And his problem was just the removal of the clause, we find racism to be irrational and repugnant. That was what he resigned over. That's what Ben, I don't want to say the other Ben's name. I guess say the right one. We have another Ben. I'm drawing a blank here now.
There's lots of Bens in our party. There actually is a ton of Bens in our party, so it's hard to keep up. I get it.
Ben Boren, who was the vice chair. So this is what now, I talked about the ideological catalyst. This is, or the cliquish, I guess it's more of a clique and an ideology catalyst. The technical catalyst for this entire debacle really was the resignation of Tim Yao and Ben Boren, because what that did, or I'm trying to think of a procedural catalyst, because that created the issue. Other vacancies in the party, yet, by the way, we had often filled by a vote of the LAC, and then following, and then at the time of the next convention, fill the vacancies. That had become standard practice. Now, there wasn't anything specific in the bylaws about filling vacancies between between odd year conventions. And the reason I bring that up is it's going to play a role later in the whole debacle. So what he had, though, was we had a vacancy in the chair and first vice chair. Now, the way our bylaws are written,
our bylaws within the state or the bylaws within the national party itself?
Good question. Right.
Let's
the way
clarify
Michigan's bylaws concerning its officers were written, and actually, I'm going to refer, in other words, what's relevant is what the bylaws were at the time. were written, because since then there have been 2 conventions at which people amended the bylaws. The way the bylaws were written, that was unambiguous that the first chair would advance to fill the chair's position. There was no other statements about anyone else advancing to the chair's position in our bylaws. So what I actually had a lengthy conversation with Andrew Chatterton where we were trying to sort all this out and, not getting deep in the weeds about the whole thing. And it was actually a private conversation, but it's kind of a public matter. So I feel, in a way, I don't think I'm out of line just mentioning that we talked about it. And that we had come to the conclusion, which he had acted on eventually, that lacking anything else, at least up until there was an alternative way of replacing the lead officer, that the second, and the reason I had to talk with him, or he had to talk with me, is he was the second vice chair. So if anybody is going to perform the duties of chair in the absence of a chair, it would seem logical that the second vice chair would do it. And in fact, that is what Robert's rules says as well. And usually I become so accustomed to just referring to the bylaws without looking that deep into Robert's rules that, because we hadn't really needed to. But that's what we came up with. And so he did end up in the role of chair up until the convention, and the vacancies that otherwise existed remained vacant. And now, another big part of this, you might go,
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Go ahead.
Well, just because I have to ask, because there were 2 conventions this year, one which I was able to go to, the other one I couldn't go to because I had 24 staples in my stomach. I had issues, I had surgery, whatever. But there were 2 conventions this year, and one
3.
Well, yeah, there were 3. Okay, you are correct. Yeah, I'm corrected. Thank you. But there were 2 really big ones that really shaped the mold of what's happening here in Michigan. So there was one in Wixom, which they called the special convention. And this is going by what I see as an outsider, because like I've said many times before, I claim no affiliation to a faction and or caucus, and I won't ever join any of that. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to stand neutral because I am here for a cause, not a caucus. But some naysayers and other believers and whatnot, I don't know what to call them at this point, will say that there was a convention drawn up in April of last year by a faction that didn't show up to said convention. And that's how this all came to be. Like, that's the big argument, right?
Actually, that would have been this year.
That was this year. Yes. We're still in this year. Thank you for that. Thank you. Let me eat my words on that. That was this year.
A couple more weeks.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and the reason that happened is because of something that happened before that. We ended up having these resignations happened shortly before we were already scheduled for our next convention, because the way it works is we had delegate nominating convention now. So now I'm in 2022 right now. Right. Delegate nominating convention to national convention, and then an additional convention, because the Michigan party would have at least one convention a year anyway, where they would do more business than just delegate nomination.
Did they not call this a special convention?
No special convention yet. These are all in the bylaws.
Okay.
These are bylaws, regular. See, I'm using the word regular conventions by practice, though that's another thing people split hairs about later. Oh, it wasn't really a regular convention. But as far as practice was concerned, it was regular in the sense that the bylaws called for that. Okay. The bylaws didn't call it regular, but it was called for regularly in the bylaws. So we had the 3 conventions in 2022. We had the delegate nomination, the national convention, and then back to the state for a convention where a primary obligation was nominating the candidates for political office. Apologize for that noise. For nominating candidates for political office. The thing was, we had vacancies to fill, and big vacancies, because we had a chair and a first vice chair resign. Oh, and by the way, when they resigned, it was funny. Like, it was big. Again, it was all, I already told you, it was over that clause. Anyway, so we had that convention, and in the course of that convention, everyone had planned on, and there was a vote going, and people were calling for ahead of that to put on the agenda that we would be filling vacancies. Well, the Andrew Chatterton, serving in the role as chair leading up to that convention, he objected to that. In his opinion, there was not enough time to give proper notice of this change in the agenda, and that since officer elections, internal officer elections, were not in the bylaws concerning that convention, he felt that there was not time for it. The overwhelming opinion of the delegates was that he was wrong about that, and that there had been sufficient time. People even argue about actually how much notice was really possible, because some people are claiming that they gave notice to the LEC, and the LEC wasn't putting word out about this intention in a timely manner, and that's why there wasn't notification. And then, of course, other people that are officers in Chatterton chaired LEC disagree with that. They say, no, we did not have to get the information soon enough to give notice in time. And so, no, these are lies, they're saying. So these are the two sides I hear going back for. And I'm not privy to, I don't have the crystal ball to know exactly who sent what when. So we ended up having that election. We filled the vacancy. Now, we could have, arguably, one could have filled the vacancies without doing anything regarding Andrew Chatterton. In fact, we almost could have just left him in there as chair and filled the other vacancies. However, he said that he would continue to find such a motion to fill any vacancies, even with him staying as chair, that he would find them out of order, and that the only way in which the body was going to be able to, and so he guided people this way, he said the only way the body is going to be able to fill any of those vacancies is you have to have a vote of no confidence and remove me as chair, and then you can do it because I won't be there to object, which is exactly what happened. And it requires the vote, and actually, while the vote of no confidence apparently didn't require a supermajority, it went on record that there was a supermajority. So it was over 2/3 of the delegates present at that convention, July 2022, had the no confidence vote, removed them, and then proceeded to fill the officers. Everything went normally now. So fast forward quite a bit, because I know this has taken a long time. Everything went normally.
Take as much time as you need, man. Like, we need to talk about this, because this isn't the only state where shit is in disarray. So, like, it might not be as bad as it is here in Michigan, because everybody knows this is a shit show here in Michigan.
Right.
Everybody knows that. But there are things that other states can kind of, listen to and grab onto this and be like, okay, it's happening here too. Maybe not to the extent of is here, because I don't hear anything of like major court battles within caucuses from any other state. This is a straight Michigan thing, and this is why we're talking about this. So please don't be bashful.
Okay. So in fact, at the same time that he said you can do this, he also said, I will object to it and I will appeal it. So he did say he was going to appeal it. I'll give him credit for that. It wasn't like it shouldn't have been a surprise, but in a way it seemed like it was. And people didn't really believe that anyone would override a convention. So at least a lot of us didn't believe it. Now, I'll count myself in there. I didn't really think that it would override a convention. Well, what happened, what followed then was we had, a perfectly good election year as far as it went. So I got elected. And that, of course, that was nonpartisan, so they didn't need to nominate me. But we got, we still have in office, for instance, so we have partisan people in office, like we have Donna Gundel Creek up in northern Michigan. She's still in office up there, and it was a pretty good election and all that. Well, her term, I think they voted on that up there. So I don't think she was up for election that year. But in any case, of course, we know how things went nationally, and it was a normal election year pretty much. So what follows this is, by the way, are you still hearing me okay?
I'm hearing you. I'm not seeing you very well. You're frozen. I'm hearing you just fine, but you are frozen for sure.
Okay, because I saw a little thing peek up that said that there's some kind of data flow problem. Okay. So then what happened after this was the whole year went by, almost, gosh, how far along did it go? Almost to Christmas, it seems. It was like late in the year. And there was another convention, and there was their judicial committee late in the year after because we had the election ended in November. So it was after the November election, and at that point, almost at the close, like the week after the election, I think he had already sent some paperwork along to the judicial committee, a 3-person body that was supposed to evaluate appeals concerning interpretation of the bylaws. And he submitted an appeal, and it was quite detailed, appealing the removal of him as chair at that convention, and effectively saying that, and of course, he mentioned earlier, part of the motive for this was because people actually wanted to fill vacancies, and he said he would find it out of order if they tried to fill vacancies. So he actually not only called for his reinstatement as chair, but also then to basically nullify any other officer elections to fill vacancies at that same event. And as it turned out, the 3-person judicial committee ruled in his favor. And that is where it really hit the fan, because I think up until then, there was a lot of people, and it was kind of annoying that we had people quitting over them not liking the direction the party was taking, instead of them trying to change its direction to the way they wanted it. Instead, but now we had another problem, and that was that we had, for the first time in the history of this party, the nullification of a big portion of a convention. I mean, we didn't, the bylaws, it wasn't with the platform, it wasn't bylaw thing, it was even here. The platform amendments weren't changed. Obviously, we weren't going to undo our own officer nominations candidate nominations for the statewide ballot and all that. We weren't going to do anything to that. But all of the internal officer elections had been nullified. Oh, and furthermore, all appointments made by that LEC since that time were also nullified. So it was a major shakeup. I mean, a lot of people perceived it as some kind of coup. Now, keep in mind, we're talking about a 3-body judicial committee, 3-person judicial committee, making this ruling. Well, normally at that point, they'd make the ruling, then people would try to be figuring what to do about it. However, and this makes this a little more interesting, and also gets some people more pissed off, is that the person in charge of the web, basically was the communications director, which made him sort of a de facto webmaster. We had someone else with that task, but that person was under the communication director. And that person, Andrew, I always say his last name wrong, Nepicino or something. I think it's Nepicino is the way to pronounce his last name. But anyway, Connor, we just always call him Connor. He had that role, and he was on the judicial committee. So as soon as they released that ruling, and I don't even know if maybe it was immediately at release or shortly after or during, or it was close enough. You might as well say it was at the same time. The website was modified to reflect their ruling. So effectively, as far as anyone else's notification was concerned, they too, anyone looking would see that it already happened. It wasn't just a matter of the Judicial Committee made a ruling and then with people deciding how to act on it. It was instantly enforced by the Judicial Committee, because one of the Judicial Committee members was also on that, had that authority as the communication director. And then people, as they tried to assert an opposing opinion by trying to change anything concerning any of the parties' accounts, were having their access reduced or their credentials completely removed, so they couldn't make those changes. Or, again, maybe simply just have them depreciated. So that is where it really hit the fan. So at first people acquiesced to it for a little bit because they weren't really sure what else to do about it. They, had a ruling published by the Judicial Committee itself. They had but then they also had this matter of it become, because so much was done through the website and through those accounts, they had effectively become powerless to do anything because of that. Now, there was some twist to this. He controlled the website. He didn't control the bank account. He didn't have control of the P.O. box. He didn't have control of the phone number. So we're like, but there was still this feeling of, well, they did rule that way. Do we really have any choice other than to comply, whether or not they took this action unilaterally or not? And the initially people were uncertain, and so the default was really that the Judicial Committee ruling stood and seemed to be in effect. However, people weren't giving things up right away. So the bank account information had not been totally turned over. Control of the phone actually still belonged, believe it or not, to Tim Yao for quite some time, all the way into this year. Even though he had resigned as chair, like months before. And so people are holding on to these things. And then so there was a meeting, and I'm trying to remember if it was in late January or in February of this year, where there was a meeting to decide whether or I know. Let me back up. Got back up. I skipped something. By the way, I'll pause. Do you have any questions about what I've said so far?
No, please keep going. I would have interrupted you if I needed to, so please keep going.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I'm in professor mode sometimes where I'm lecturing, and a professor actually shouldn't be in a mode of continuing to lecture without saying, are there any questions? But
no, please keep going.
Until I sometimes do get interrupted. But anyway, before the end of the year, there had already been, in fact, now we're talking into December here. They had already
December 22, yes.
Yeah. People who had objected to the Judicial Committee decision decided, well, you know what? The bylaws do allow us to, there are all these complaints about notification, but the bylaws do allow us to have a special convention if we can get enough members, 10% of the members, to petition to hold one. And at that special convention, we can specify exactly what we want to do. And there's no way in heck they're going to find anything that's going to stop us from filling those vacancies. And furthermore, they're not going to find anything to stop us from a no confidence vote in the chair. Now, I was one of those people who I was trying to give Andrew a break, basically. And I'd even, try to encourage him, saying, when it came to filling those vacancies by the LEC, that he attempt to fill them with the same people that were elected at that convention, because it was the wish of the delegates and the party. And as the chair, you want to, be here, have your ear to the ground and listen to what the members are saying of the party and all that. Well, he didn't do any of that. He didn't follow any of that advice. He was not acting in line with really I mean, other than leaving me in as 14th district rep, no, he didn't even do that. Actually, I got replaced from that as well, eventually. Which is funny. It was actually a dead end position anyway, because we got redistricted and now we only have 13 districts.
Yeah.
But anyway,
That's how
but
a lot of states lost a lot of chairs, was because of redistricting. Like, we need to stop there and actually talk about that for a second, because when it comes to redistricting, people don't understand how the effects come from that, but there's some serious effects that come from redistricting. There's certain chairs that disappear, there's certain positions that disappear, and then all's supposed to be well, right? But you've literally strong-armed somebody out from probably an opposing position, is what they've done.
Yeah. So the special convention happened because people wanted to get done the same things they wanted to get done at the 2020, the 2022 July convention, where we had filled all those vacancies. And I personally, again, I didn't like the no confidence part. And that's, I guess, part of like kind of my unifying attitude here is that you don't necessarily want to boot people. I want to get people in. And so I was willing to actually, I actually argued with some of the people who were discussing the petition that, hey, why don't we split it? So in the end, there were actually 2 special convention petitions, which could then, if both of them passed, it would call for the special convention to include both the no confidence vote in the chair and a filling of vacancies, including the chair. And the other one would not have the no confidence vote in the chair, but would be calling for the filling of all other vacancies that had not been filled by someone who was elected. And that was the special convention. Now, keep in mind that this petition was going around in December, and I don't have the dates down exactly, but I'll mention the qualitative points that are relevant to the dates, which is that the bylaws say that upon submission of the petitions, that the LEC will have 45 days. The LEC will have to call a special convention to take place within 45 days of receipt. So from the date of receiving those petitions, add 45 days onto that, which pushes us into, I think it had come out with a date where the I think it might have been sometime in February it would have come out to, if you went the full 45, would have been the deal. Now there is also another part though where it's still, and this is where contradictions in the bylaws became an issue. There was also a part where it said, well, there's 60 days that you have to notify members of all conventions. You must notify everyone 60 days in advance. And of course, notification was the issue beforehand. Well, I believe that would have pushed it to some date in early March if they had given. So my thought was, it seems to me that to comply, they might miss the 45-day mark, but at least comply with the 60-day mark. There would be no reason to go beyond that, because after all, the bylaws already said 45 days. So if you're going to use another bylaw that has 60 days notification, that's really the furthest you could push it back or forwarding. That's the furthest you could push it.
Right now, when it comes to the special convention that happened here in April, which I was actually a part of the vote where they were saying whether to take the word special out of that, term, convention or not, per se. And then that's where it ended for me, because I had surgery. I couldn't actually show up to that convention at all. I had 24 staples in my belly at that point. But, that being said, who, in your opinion, drew up that special convention, special quote unquote, in April in Wixom, Michigan? Whose idea was that? Was that the Mises Caucus idea, or was that the old guard idea?
Well, and the thing is, I'm going to say, put it this way. you got me onto another topic here because of the use of the phrase old guard.
Well, no. I'm just because that's the two terms that you hear in the state of Michigan
Sure.
is it the Mises Caucus or is it the old guard, quote unquote? So that's where I'm running with this, you know.
Right.
That
And
those are the
I'm
two
going to
terms
point
that
something out here. When they had the Judicial Committee ruling, two of the people on there were fairly new, but even Connor had been around a couple of years. One of the people on that committee was Bob Rodis, the late Bob Rodis, who is now deceased, or was it Robert? Okay, Bob Robert, whatever. Rodis, who is now deceased. So we try to keep a good memory of him here, but he was on that Judicial Committee, and he was definitely old guard because he had been around for quite a long time. He ran for Supreme Court with our party, like, I don't know, 9 years ago or something. It was a while back. And we have new people that had joined recently that were definitely, were considered themselves anti-Mises. And so I don't necessarily think that necessarily we're talking about people old or new on that, I guess is what I'm saying. Maybe on average, but not necessarily.
Okay.
I definitely could call myself old guard. I've been a part of this party since 80 something. So 1980 something. So
Which is why I wanted to have you on. You're like one of the OGs of this whole movement.
yeah,
Like you've been doing this shit for a
I'll
long time.
accept that label for myself, but I just don't want to
You've
call
been doing this forever.
the anarchist, that I'm thinking of right in my head right now, who joined like maybe 3 years ago, old guard, when she was maybe it was more like 4 or 5 years ago, when she basically joined at the same time as Andrew and Connor and the people that are clearly Mises Caucus people joined. So that isn't necessarily it. But it's definitely a division, I suppose, between the people who are with or not with Mises Caucus. And so back to the core of your question, and right before we got all on terminology,
Sorry.
who called the special convention in April? Well, let me
Quote
clarify.
unquote special convention.
Yeah, the so-called old guard, the non-Mises membership, the membership that really wanted to keep the result, or let's even make it less caucusy than that. The people that objected to the Judicial Committee ruling and wanted to uphold the 2022 convention officer election, those people were behind both petitions, which both passed overwhelmingly. Well, obviously that you're not going to sign it if you're against it. But both of them easily met the minimum requirement. I was not one of the signers of both petitions. Like I told you earlier, I only signed the one for the officer election, not for the no confidence vote. And there was like maybe one or two other people with me on that. I think they were both from Wayne County and had good feelings about Andrew as a Wayne County chair, which he still is. He's chair of both the state party and of the Wayne County affiliate. And so what happened though was we felt that if the convention was more than 60 days late, then there wouldn't be any further excuse to use that 45-day requirement to hold things in place, that if they try to put it any later, that they were doing it in violation of the bylaws of the LEC, who is the people in the LEC as a result of the Judicial Committee ruling, were in place because of that. And so that their removal, that what they could do later on is if they didn't like the way the special convention went, there was a fear by members that members of the Judicial Committee would just find that also out of order for those reasons, and we'd be back where we were. So that is what led to, I'm going to say probably, I think it was still January, late January, where still a date had not been set for the special convention. It was either late January, early February. We'd gotten to a point where there still had not been a date set for the special convention, and where notification at that point would have been insufficient to have it within that 60 days, that it was too far along, and it definitely wasn't going to make it within the 45 days. In fact, that much time may have already gone by. It was quite a while later. So that was when the people who were on the who were elected in July of 2022 called a meeting. And keep in mind, some of the people remained after the Judicial Committee decision because they were elected back in 2021, and other people were removed. So you had a mixed, there was overlap, plenty of overlap. And in fact, anyone who was pro Mises, who had not been, well, basically who was already on the LEC, would have still been on it, who had not resigned, and they weren't the ones resigning. So anyway, a meeting was called, and it was called by Joe Brungard, who was the chair, elected chair to fill the vacancy at the July 2022 convention. He called the LEC based upon the way the LEC was prior to the Judicial Committee decision, including people that were of any caucus, just anybody who had been an officer between that convention and the Judicial Committee ruling. Anyone who'd been an officer then was called to that special convention.
Okay, first,
not convention, I'm sorry, that LEC meeting.
Let me start this off by saying, if you saw me rolling my eyes, I was not rolling my eyes at you. I have this 14-week-old puppy pit bull and a 10-year-old pit bull who are actually both very large, and they are having WrestleMania right above us right now. I'm like, holy shit. I hope nobody can hear that right now. And I'm sorry if you do. But anyways,
that would be kind of cool, but
that's the way of the internet world when it comes to this stuff. But sorry about that. I'm not rolling my eyes at you. I don't mean that at all. It's like, oh my God, what's happening above me? But anyways, when it comes to the quote unquote special convention, which I never liked, okay, me being, and which was actually, to be quite frank with you, was my first ever local affiliate meeting was in Wayne County, where I met you for the first time, which was last year. I was on my way into surgery. It was one of the last things I could do to just get out of the house and forget about things for a while before I had this done. But there was a vote on whether to take the word special out of special convention or not, and I'll never forget that. And the meeting was actually quite heated, considering circumstances. And you were one of the front runners who were like, hey man, we don't need to call this anything. It's a convention and we need to do this, and I remember that as clear as day. It's almost a year later at this point. My question is, so the quote unquote old guard called for this convention and then they didn't show up.
Right. And again, the reason that happened was when they had the LEC meeting then in early this year, that there was concern that because it would not be called within a timely manner, that it would then be overruled by the Judicial Committee again. And that's what the fear was. And my attitude on the whole thing was the following. I said, you know what? Let them call their bluff. Call the bluff. Let's go ahead, because there was that meeting, first of all, and then shortly after, they did actually call a date, but they called it for April 1st. And so we hadn't yet scheduled anything. People started meeting and talking about it and feeling that it was out of line. And so when the April 1st date came up, and in fact, I might have the timeline slightly skewed here now that I'm thinking back about it, because I'm acting on memory. I don't have any notes in front of me or anything. And normally,
well, it's been a long time since then, and we all have lives and shit.
Right. So. And I figured that would make the interview go lame anyway, if you have to sit and wait for me to look at notes and I'm reading things. So I may be a little off here. It may be that, in fact, they had already called it for April, but it was just too late, April 1st. And so we did have one of these LEC meetings that were called by Joe Brungard again. That was then dealing with how to handle that. And what they had been claiming was that, first of all, there's something in the Nonprofit Corporation Act that and oh, this is the other thing, is that in addition to our own bylaws, we had corporate bylaws as the Libertarian Party Executive Committee, Inc. Well, I'm sorry, I didn't say that fully right. Libertarian Party of Michigan Executive Committee, Inc. And that based upon that under the Nonprofit Act, there was a clause that said that the that only the members could could recall or remove a officer, and if it was membership based. Now, it was later pointed out to me that, well, actually it was what the phrase they said was directorship based. But then the other problem with that argument was that, well, the Judicial Committee aren't directors. They are a committee, and a committee is still not a board of directors. Effectively, the LEC is the directorship of the party. And so without the LEC calling for the removal of those officers, that's still technically that it was invalid for the Judicial Committee by themselves to remove those officers, that it would require additional executive action in support of a Judicial Committee decision to remove the officers. So that was the position. And lawyers can argue this back and forth, and it's been argued back and forth on the various social media groups and whatnot. And again, you could bounce the ball back and forth about that. But at the time, I found that to be pretty compelling. And a lot of other people did. A lot of people, I think, wanted to hear a way out. They wanted to hear a way to bring back the decision of the members who had shown up in 2022 to have their will be heard. So we have this, the LEC had capitulated and called the convention in April 1st, which again, a lot of people thought was too late to be legit. But there was then a discussion as to whether or not to start scheduling a regular convention for 2023 on the presumption that, in fact, the Judicial Committee's decision was purely advisory because they were a committee, not directors, not a convention, and that they would then be, that we could then just move forward without the special convention at all. My opinion at that time, and I said it loudly and it didn't take, was that let's have the special convention anyway. Show up. I mean, they scheduled it. It's going to happen anyway. Let's show up there. Because otherwise, if you don't show up, then the majority is going to vote to keep Andrew Chair as chair, which that part I wasn't so bothered by, but will refuse to fill the vacancies with the people you want. And in fact, will fill the vacancies with people they want.
Which is what happened, correct?
Exactly what happened.
Okay.
And I said, let's go ahead, show up. Everyone should show up at that convention. And if we want to have a regular convention to elect new officers, to amend the bylaws, to patch the holes in the bylaws, to amend the platform and all those things, we want to do that, we should schedule it for some date later than April 1st. In other words, and then people are like, oh no, we can't trust them. They're going to try something shifty. And my answer to that was, let them. If they're going to do anything shifty, call their bluff, hold the thing, vote, win, get your way at the special convention. And then if they do anything shifty, during the convention that prevents the majority from getting their will, if they do anything later to try to overturn it, now you can say, look, see, we told you so. This is what they're doing. People didn't listen to me. They went ahead. So I'm being the I told you so guy here. Now I am. Now I'm saying I told you so.
Because nobody showed up. Nobody from quote unquote old guard showed up to the convention that they started. And so things got voted on without their approval because they weren't there.
Right. We were in Lansing. I'm including me on this. We're in
Right.
Lansing.
I
And
wasn't there
my
because
thought
I
was,
couldn't be there.
yeah, my thought was if we're going to do this, we need to do it later so people can, you can give the first one a chance. If in giving the first convention a chance, it fails, you still got the regular convention. It's already in the bylaws to go ahead and vote in new officers a couple months later.
This show is sponsored by Infinite Zeal Syndicate. You can follow him on Twitter at _Infinite Zeal. He is a great liberty-minded fella that just wants to share the message of liberty and also has fantastic merch like this hat I'm wearing right now. You see me wear it on every show. He's a great gentleman, and I highly suggest you give him a follow because he's one of the good ones, ladies and gentlemen. Now let's get on with the show.
Well, no. They all said, nope, if we're going to say that this thing doesn't matter anymore, that this April 1st thing, we're going to hold our convention at the same time as like our convention. Who called for it? We did. At the same time as the special convention we called for. And we're going to give them, therefore, because we can't be in two places at once. One's in Wixom, one's in Lansing. We're going to basically give it to them. And that's exactly what happened. I showed up in Lansing and I actually worked my butt off because I wanted to make sure that we had a strong majority in Lansing. So if anyone disputed it later, it would be like, well, the people were in Lansing. This other thing didn't matter because we didn't have many people there. Because I wanted it to be separate. But if they were going to be on the same day at the same time, my thought was, well, then we better make sure that we get a lot of people in Lansing because it's going to be an uphill battle, which it has become. So yeah, we had excellent attendance. It was roughly 70 people. You know, you could quibble about when people were coming and going. And you had roughly 40 people showing up and people were coming and going. And, you know, when the credentials report came in, whatever, roughly 40 people showing up in Wixom. Okay. So clearly a strong showing for the Lansing convention. And at that convention,
but you put those two numbers together now, right? Now, this is going to be my point right here. Now put your numbers from Wixom to Lansing together. And how much does that come to?
Yeah, it comes out to the people in Lansing getting their way.
No, but what I'm saying is that's not the point I'm getting at. Do the math. What is the total number of people who showed up to Wixom and the people who showed up to Lansing?
Over 40 and over 70.
So we're talking about roughly 110 to 120 people. And we're literally arguing amongst ourselves over 110 to 120 people. We're way beyond this. And this is where I come in. This is where I'm like, hey, what the fuck are we doing here? Because it's absolutely ridiculous. There's about 10 million people in the state of Michigan. And we're going to argue and waste resources over 110 to 120 people. To me, in my personal opinion, it seems utterly ridiculous, number one. And number two, it shows me that we have a lot more work to do in order to get liberty across to the masses than a stupid court battle, which has cost tens of thousands of dollars, by the way, tens of thousands of dollars. Little did I know when I did the show with Ben DeYoung that the LP National had actually put forth tens of thousands of dollars to this court cause. Wouldn't that wouldn't that money be better used putting forth the cause over a court case when libertarianism should be a thing that is worked out amongst ourselves? That's what we thrive on. We don't need the state, right? But now we're inviting the state into our business. And they're taking our money. They're taking all of it and they're laughing their way to the bank. And we look like a bunch of buffoons. That's what we look at. That's what we look like. And that's where I come in right now. And I get goosebumps talking about this. Look at the hair on my arm stand up right now. I get goosebumps talking about it because it's a
better
waste,
resolution on your camera.
It's a waste of resources. It's so
absolutely
stupid.
It is very
so stupid. And you're the man of the Unity Caucus. And I want to be a part of the unification of this party. And what we both need to do is, though, I'm not saying what we need to do by any means. Actually, you know what? that's not libertarian either. We don't need to do anything. We should come together as a collective and be like, hey, let's fight this system. Let's damn the man. Let's dismantle the state. But instead, we are fighting amongst ourselves and inviting the state into our problem, saying, please fix this for us, when that's not libertarian at all. That asking the state to resolve our problems is very far from libertarian.
Yeah. Oh, and I might add, even the National Party they may believe or claim they're resolving the problem.
Tens of
We're also
thousands.
for localization, aren't we? For decentralization. And in fact, doesn't the national bylaws say that the National Party stay out of state party business?
Thank you.
So,
thank you.
And this is all over. And of course, the insistence is, well, oh, but we're, the people we recognize were following the bylaws. Okay, whether they were or not, you're not. So it's like, you're not following the national bylaws. Anyway, yeah, so and so we had that convention. And by the way, Mike Saliba was chair because he had already moved up to that position after being given temporarily being allowed into that role from the by sorry, who resigned here, Joe Brungart didn't want to continue on as chair. So he had already stepped down and let Mike Saliba fill that role. Mike Saliba seemed to have more of the temperament, was willing to actually deal with all the BS that was involved in this whole thing. So he ended up getting elected chair, and we filled a bunch of vacancies with other people that were already kind of de facto serving in that role capacity. Anyway, at that April 1st Lansing convention, the bylaws were pretty well patched up at that Lansing convention. However, after that, we just continued in our split course in the same old way, and to nobody's surprise, well, gee, the people in Wixom voted to fill vacancies with people they liked, and there was a resounding, overwhelming no vote on the no confidence vote in Andrew Chatterton. That happened. No one's big surprise there either. And so then where are we? Well, we're divided. That's where we are. We have now effectively two leadership groups, each one claiming the other one's a fraud and pointing fingers at each other.
And they're both being very childish. I will say that right now. Both sides being very.
And I was pretty childish myself at times. I'll admit it. Yeah, I wasn't always, behaving my best. I wasn't always being conciliatory. I was often being a bit rude, maybe a bit snotty about it. Snotty Scotty. Yeah, so
snotty Scotty.
Right. And so, I wrote about it, and it's not like I wrote anything inaccurate, but I certainly weighted, my opinions into things. I didn't really hide that either, but yeah, I wrote some things about it in Independent Political Report and Third Party Watch about it. And what I wrote was accurate. I'll stand by the accuracy of what I put in there. Maybe my angle, I would have taken perhaps a different angle and perhaps given a little more recognition to two sides if I were to do it now, but no, it was accurate. There were purges. I called it that. Now, maybe now I could step back and say, well, purges sounds a little more, what's the word I'm looking for? Negative or derogatory than perhaps simply saying that there was a vote to remove officers, which they did have, that because I mentioned earlier, we had an overlap of these two groups. And as soon as one group asserted itself, especially post-Lansing convention, as the legitimate group, and the people that were still in there that hadn't changed since the Judicial Committee decision still found themselves amidst those people, and those people being at their meetings, at the meetings of that LEC, that the majority of them did vote out, or even I think they may have gotten up to 2/3, did vote out those people and quickly replaced them with people that would vote their way. And then those people proceeded to vote out other people until effectively there was no overlap. That's pretty much how it went. And so we have now two separate leadership groups even now. And of course, where I made the big Unity Caucus push is after the Lansing thing happened, after I saw this purging going on, and I'm like, well, what are we going to do about it? And the only thing I could come up with, well, and meanwhile, the bank account had gone into like basically some kind of limbo, and I guess it's still there, where the
There
bank
is
had
no bank account. Let's just get that out of the way. There's no bank account. It's gone. It's all gone. And actually, the National Party is floating the bill at this point, from what I know. So this is really gross. This is actually very gross at this point.
Yeah. Well, supposedly at some point the bank is going to have their own little hearing and decide who to recognize, but it hasn't happened yet. That's what I heard.
Now,
And
okay, go ahead. No, go ahead. Go. Keep going.
Yeah. And so meanwhile, the other thing is, so we have this convention, that the people chaired by Andrew Chatterton, that LSC had scheduled for July of this year. And my thought was, okay, and in fact, this actually, I didn't come up with it then. I thought of it before the convention in Lansing. I knew there was going to be a problem as soon as we had two conventions on the same date in two different places. And one was, this special convention. The other was, I already knew that was going to be a problem, that there could be a split afterward. I could already see that writing on the wall. I had actually made a resolution up. I had written a resolution. I think I called it the Unity Resolution, and presented it to the body of delegates in Lansing, that we would simply show up at whatever convention, because at some point by the bylaws, the other group was going to have to call a regular convention of their own, and there would be officer conventions, there would be votes on bylaws, there would be votes on platform. And the resolution in so many words simply said that we would affirm that we were going to show up if we were able to. We're going to make every effort to show up at that convention as delegates and vote exactly the way we voted in Lansing. And if we did that as a block, then the whole thing would still be resolved in the favor of those people present. Well, that resolution failed. And it mainly failed. Actually, I think it may have attracted a majority, but you need 2/3. I think it failed, if I recall right, at least the people giving verbal objections, they simply, stuck to their guns that the people in the other group were not the legitimate leadership. We did not want to have them involved in anything we were doing. We couldn't trust them. All this negative divisive talk about the same people that we were rubbing shoulders with and working to campaign with just a few months prior, all the way up to leading up to the elections, we were all on the same team. I mean, I have pictures of Mike Saliba and Andrew Chatterton going out campaigning together to help get Mike Saliba elected to Congress. I got pictures of that, and Connor Nepicino there. We were all together. We were one family. All of a sudden, the other side's bad, and we're good. And that was pretty much the mentality, that they couldn't trust them. They didn't want to work with them, that they weren't legitimate anyway. So why would we show up at something that wasn't legitimate when we're having the legitimate convention in Lansing right now? So nobody listened. It got voted down. Okay. So fast forward back to getting toward July. There really is going to, or, let's say put it even up to June. There's going to be this convention in July, regardless of how people voted or whether or not any resolution got passed. I then continued to push the idea that, hey, you know what? And I would say this at the LEC meetings that Mike Saliba was chairing. I said, look, show up at the July convention. Everyone show up. I know you don't believe they're legitimate. They believe they are. They believe National believes that convention in July of 2022 in Pinconning, Michigan will be legitimate.
Which is the one I got to show up to and I spoke at, actually.
Right.
And you
I
were
was there too.
You were there too.
Because I wanted everybody to show up. I'm like, look, if we're the Libertarian Party of Michigan and people are having trouble trying to figure out who we are, let's all show up there. Everyone who can show up at the thing in Pinconning, and let's get together in the same room, hash this out, get people elected that have a majority support among the active leaders membership of this party. And the active membership is basically whoever shows up. Well, I guess the active membership shrunk quite a bit between those 100.
Let me cut in real quick because I was there and I believe the number was 47. 47 people showed up to that state convention out of 10 million Michiganders, as they call us. 47 people of 10 million people showed up to the convention of the Libertarian Party in July. Now, that being said, what the fuck are we doing?
Yeah.
Seriously, no, this is my big qualm. This party, this liberty movement is my passion. This is why I do this show. This is why I talk to people. This isn't just something I want to do to hear myself talk. I know what's the outcome. I know what's coming. I talk about this all the time on my show. Like, I don't do this for me. I don't do this for notoriety or anything like that. I don't want the spotlight on me at all. I do this to pass a message along to my fellow peers, my fellow Michiganders, and my fellow Americans. This is why I do this. It has nothing to do with me. I don't want any type of spotlight on me, but I feel like there needs to be attention drawn to the fact that the state, which I mean by the state, it's not just the state of Michigan, the state as a government is infringing on our rights on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, on a minute basis. It doesn't stop.
And not a little, a lot.
A lot. And so
we're the frog that's at, 99.9 degrees Celsius in the water at this point.
Yes. Yes, we are. So if we're going to fight amongst ourselves when we can only get 47 people to a state convention, it's redundant. It's ridiculous. It seems silly. It's stupid. It really is. I love you guys. I love my Mises Caucus people. I love my Unity Caucus people. I love my Sober Caucus people. It's damaging to the cause itself. And it's a waste of resources. Money. I'm always bringing up money on this show because money's important. Money wins you elections. And if you're spending it on court battles because you can't figure out how to, get along with your homies, you're definitely not going to win an election, especially a national convention, a national election. So my question to you is, how are we going to move forward from this? Or is it even possible?
It's possible, but it requires the will of a lot more people than myself. And it was possible to move forward on a couple occasions. I already mentioned the easiest one most recently would have been in July if those people had simply shown up and we had a convention attended by, at least 80 people or so. I think we would have had, a decent, or maybe even more, maybe, we could have gone up to 110 people. We had enthusiastic involvement in a convention, by a regular convention, by all the members, or not all the members, but all the active members, because we never get all the members. That would have been great. We didn't have it. They refused. Oh, and I know there's a lot of argument about the delegate selection process too. Some people got disaffiliated. But there was still a way for people, even in those affiliates, to become delegates, because they had the unaffiliated delegate conventions that effectively, if you had a majority of the people attending the unaffiliated delegate attend conventions being of a certain, support base, they could have gotten their way then. There was plenty of opportunities, but the bottom line is most people in the so-called what you call the old guard, whatever, in the or the .NET caucus at one point, because they got their own website because the other one had been controlled by the other people. That those people most of them refused to show up. I think there may be a grand total of 5 or 6 of us at that convention in Pinkani. And so as a result, and when I'm saying us, I mean, I should be saying the entire Libertarian Party, but yeah, we definitely did have our own preferences and we were going to vote those preferences if we were there. But again, it didn't happen that way. And even the court thing you talk about itself, the court thing itself actually exacerbates the problem, not just because it's draining money, not just because it's making lawyers rich, not just because it's dragging on forever and won't really fix anything, no matter who wins the lawsuits. Because it's as far as that, it's kind of like, in war games. If you ever saw that old movie from the 80s,
Yeah.
the only way to win is not to play. It was like basically what we're faced with here is the nuclear option, literally. And so the way forward is to, first of all, stop the insult, stop the vitriol, stop calling people frauds, stop calling people that you should be on the same side with dishonest, or even I remember at one point I was calling, I think, Andrew Chatterton autocratic. I stop calling him autocratic, Scott. Okay, let's all look at what really matters, because the real threat is not who your chair is not going to be who the fact that so and so is a member of some pack. The problem is that we are controlled by a totalitarian, maybe less totalitarian than other places, but totalitarian nonetheless government. I mean, the only limitations it has on it is pretty much what the majority is willing to tolerate at this point. And even sometimes they go against the majority, I guess, is what the majority is willing to put up with, maybe indirectly by voting for the same people who don't even share their own beliefs half the time. I mean, that's what we're dealing with here. And we need to educate the public on those kind of things. We don't need to educate the public on the bylaws of the Libertarian Party of Michigan. We don't need to educate the public on the Mises Caucus, or we don't need to educate the public on why some of us don't like the Mises Caucus. We don't need any of that. What we need is to get the government off our back. Now,
which would entail getting your bitch asses out of the court system. Yes, I just said bitch asses. Get your bitch asses out of the court system and handle this shit like men and or women. Right.
And the court thing actually has created problems. I could give you a couple examples. I was newsletter editor until recently, and I was actually had 2 parallel versions of the newsletter to be going on both sites, because and I will credit on the Saliba side that he was actually more tolerant, I think, of diverse content in the newsletter than Andrew was. But nonetheless, I was willing to tailor the 2 newsletters to accommodate the 2 groups. And I even had a different list of officers. We always had an officer list in the newsletter in each one. Well, I had an article about a gun rally that we a gun rights protest that had happened in Detroit, where some people from both groups actually had shown up. And
talk about Greektown?
Yeah. And in fact, the majority of the people that showed up at one of them were in fact, there was an earlier one, and then there was a later one I couldn't make it to because I was working. But the majority of people showing up at that one, I say, were actually probably, Chatterton supporters more so than Saliba supporters, but there were people from both there. And I wrote about it, and I had pictures. And because the article, even though the article that I submitted to appear in the .org version of the newsletter, the Wixom Chatterton group, whatever newsletter, because it was so similar to the one that was on the .net website, because it was so similar, I remember Andrew or someone else, with that LEC telling me that, well, it looks too similar. We want to make sure that we appear distinct or it will hurt our case in court. That's what our attorney is advising us. So because of the court case, even coverage of unifying events became a problem, because if it appeared on both websites, it would somehow weaken the court case. And
Good.
that was
Please
just one
weaken the
example.
court case. Please weaken that. Please.
Yeah.
The court case has to go.
And then on the other side, people were arguing that it would weaken the court case if people had followed my advice and gotten involved in the convention called by the other, the other group, that somehow that would also, and so the court case became also an excuse to continue the divisions. Now here's where it goes. I went through this argument with the people on these boards, and I probably froze up again based on the signal message.
A little bit, but I
can
can hear you. Right? I still got you.
Okay. The way it'll go, if we just try to let the government decide for us, I mean, let's follow this to its logical conclusion. Either the LNC will or won't win its copyright infringement case. If they lose, that means that the people that are in the LEC, chaired by Mike Saliba, that have the website, that had a website, MichiganLP.net, will be able to reopen MichiganLP.net. They'll be able to put the website back up again. They'll be able to call themselves the Libertarian Party of Michigan. And then we're back where we were before the LNC brought the lawsuit. Well, that isn't any good. We're still divided. The other possibility, the LNC wins the lawsuit. Well, okay, well, then I suppose it's going to become impossible in that particular case for anyone else to call themselves the Libertarian Party of Michigan. A lot of people at that point might just quit. A lot of people that would have otherwise been valuable activists, if they couldn't pull this thing out from their buns. A lot of people might just quit. A lot of people might try to form a separate splinter party, which would be an absolute nightmare. In my opinion, it probably wouldn't even go anywhere. It probably wouldn't have ballot access. And then we have this other possibility that's even further along. So let's say, so that would seem to at least leave one party, one man standing, so to speak, one faction left, able to legally do anything. But keep in mind, they got to legally be the only one using the bludgeon of the state, which doesn't necessarily sound all that great for us either. All right, so then we have this other problem coming up. You got a convention at which you will be nominating delegates. Well, who do you think is going to actually be recognized by the LNC? I don't think it takes a rocket scientist, though I am somewhat of a rocket scientist. It doesn't take a rocket scientist or a lawyer or a parliamentarian to figure out that the LNC at national is only going to recognize people that are elected at, or delegates that are chosen at a convention presided over by Andrew Chatterton, or the LEC that Andrew Chatterton is currently chairing. That is the only group they're going to recognize. That's the group they fought the lawsuit for. So whether or not they win the lawsuit, they're going to still be able to pick the delegates to the national convention, period. So any counter effort, I've heard people go, oh, we're going to show up anyway and try to challenge it. It's like, why? You haven't challenged anything else they did with their judicial committee at the national level. You haven't challenged a whole bunch of things, but you're going to show up at spend money on a big trip and throw a convention in Michigan to select people that national is not going to accept. That makes no sense. Okay, so that's kind of a dead deal, but that's not the worst of it. All that would do is leave us with effectively, people from one faction being delegates and people from another not being delegates in the national convention. What's worse, much worse than that, is our regular convention to be held after that is the one at which we nominate officers to go on the ballot. If two groups, and I don't have to say if, let me go into history. When two groups claiming to be the same minor party showed up with candidate lists to the Secretary of State, I'm referring to the Reform Party, which for a moment even had primary ballot access, was at one point the leading third party. Two people from that group show up with different lists of candidates. Guess what happened? Neither got on. You're not on for an election cycle. you are no longer legally a political party.
Well, you kind of hit the nail on the head, though, when you brought up ballot access. Now, believe it or not, because I have people who listen to this show all over the United States and other countries, actually, believe it or not. I just got my Spotify and review, and I had multiple countries. Like, people are listening to you here, 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 boom, 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 boom. Okay, great. Now, that being said, sorry to clear my throat. I had a frog in there. But that being said, you know, we live in communist Michigan. It's not a secret. Like, this state is we'll call it fascist. Okay, we live in fascist Michigan. But libertarians do have ballot access here. Libertarians are on the ballot every election here in the state of Michigan. Now, at the rate we're going with the divide within the state party, that's going bye-bye. You aren't going to run shit. Not a damn thing. You're not going to run nobody, whether it's, Chatterton or Saliba or whoever you want, those are the only names, or the only time I'm going to bring up names because they've been brought up, but like, you're not going to run any of those people if you're not going to get on the ballot, and you're not going to be on the ballot at the rate we're going at this point as a state party. It's not happening. And I'm a realist. This is why we're BudsNReality, because I like to smoke weed and talk real shit. And the fact of the matter is, it's not going to happen if we are going to keep doing this. It's going to all go bye-bye, and it's just going to, fizzle away in the sun or the sand or whatever you want to call it. It's winter here right now, so it'll fizzle away in the snow. It's not going to happen. I personally have taken steps to reach out to both factions, and I wrote a little something to both sides on Friday, November 24th. And I'm going to read it to you guys. It says, "Good afternoon, my fellow rebels." This went to both factions, mind you, via X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it. "Good afternoon, my fellow rebels. I come to you from a place of love and genuine concern to what's happening within the state party. It's no secret this is a disaster. Tensions are high. No need to sugarcoat this. I believe that this can all be saved, though. Liberty is always worth saving. And I believe that in my heart. Liberty is always worth saving. So my question is, are both sides willing to get into a room together and hash this out like adults? If so, let's. I claim no affiliation to a faction or caucus. I'd love to mediate this. Let's get back to what's important: liberty. Peace, love, and liberty, Sean." That's what I wrote. What I got in response was a heart. And as of yesterday, I got a response from the other faction. One faction left me a heart. The other faction said, "I think some people on this side would be more than happy to find a path forward," and then let the conversation. Okay. Now, what I will say from a personal basis, that one person has come forward and said they're willing to talk. It doesn't matter which side they're from. You know who you are. Where's the other side? I am willing to do this. I'm willing to mediate this. I am willing to try to fix this, if you believe it's fixable. If not, then what's the point? We need to stop this, end the court case, stop wasting our money on this shit, and then just not be a state affiliate at all. That's my rebuttal to all this. I'm nobody in this world. But I'm willing to offer to mediate a solution to this, because I'm a business owner on top of this show, and I'm good at closing deals. That's why I did this. I have a pretty successful business. I'm not rich by all means, but like I have a pretty successful business where I get by, and my wife and I have a life, and it's because I can close deals for my business. So I feel like I can close deals for this. One side is saying they're willing to do it. The other side is crickets. Mm-hmm. You know who you are. Do you want to fix this or not? That's where I'm at right now. I feel like it's worth fixing. If you don't, then let's not. But in the meantime, get the hell out of court, quit wasting resources, and let people who want to get things done, get them done. That's where I'm at.
Yeah. um, it's the people need to get it together. And the thing is, it was good to get, even though it was only about 25 people or so. It was good to get that many people in the room for Libby Fest. But my advice moving forward then is, obviously get together in the same room and talk. But of course, that's what we've been demanding forever, and it seems like it's never happening. But it does have to happen at some point, and maybe it has to happen at maybe people need to stop this dueling convention thing and show up at and and again, I'm the guy who showed up in Lansing, just to be clear. I was the guy, I voted to make Mike Saliba chair. I did not vote to make Andrew Chatterton chair. But I'm saying this to be quite clear. There's only one convention that's going to be recognized by national. So one thing we can do to get in the same room. No, we're not going to elect any new officers. We're probably not going to amend the platform, though I suppose you might. The bylaws are going to be off the table. But yeah, people can show up at the not delegate nominating convention. And that means you need to show up at your local affiliates. It means being involved. And by the way, the affiliates, a couple of them got disaffiliated by the .org group, but most of the affiliates are still neutral in this whole thing. Most of the affiliates are recognized by both factions. Get involved in your local affiliates. Get involved in activities that the party is doing outside of the state leadership. Interact with the other libertarians and support candidates. And by the way, I know this name has already been out there, but he is a candidate nonetheless. Mike Saliba is a candidate. He's running for township board over in, I think, Clinton Township in Macomb County. They have a special election. Support him for office as a libertarian running for office, whether or not you want him to be chair of anything. Just as a candidate. Do that. That's something we can do together. We can work for the Defend the Guard Act, which a lot of the people in the Mises caucus are real big on. What is the Defend the Guard Act? It's to basically prevent the National Guard from being used to fight wars abroad. I think we all agree on that. Join if you got people infringing on the right to keep and bear arms. Obviously, that's been a couple different events, and that's why I think Ryan Brennan needs to be applauded, and why
Ryan Brennan is a gem in this party, and it's not just within the state. He's actually been on my show before. He's great. Ryan Brennan, Rin Brinley, whatever you want to call him, the guy is that's his Twitter name is Rin Brinley, but like the guy is great, and he's all about unity too. Like there's a lot of people who want to end this shit, but there's some who don't. But like honestly, you guys, it's either we need to get into one room off record, by the way. There's no courts, there's no lawyers, there's no delegates per se or whatever. We need to get into one room and be like, hey, we need to figure this out, like men and or women, of course. We need to figure it out, because that's what libertarians do, is figure things out amongst ourselves. Get the state out of this and stop wasting resources, especially coming in on an election year. That is, I'm not going to be one of those. It's the most important election of our lifetime, because that's been since I'm 43 years old. It's always been the most.
Every election is the most important election.
Yeah, it's always the most important one of our lifetime. But like, if you really want to move forward and get things going and get the ball rolling in this party, we got to knock this shit off. It has to end right now.
Mm-hmm.
This is the end of it. It has to end. Get out of court, figure it out, and just move on. There's been talks of, amnesty for all. I've heard that thrown around a little bit. It doesn't matter how I feel about that. I feel some type of way about that, but is it possible? I mean, anything's possible. I don't think it's feasible. No, we're not just gonna, people are not just gonna be like, okay, we're just gonna throw, this is just water under the bridge and we're all just gonna get along. But we can make deals. There can be deals made. Anything can be made a deal. Let's start there. Let's start there and move forward. Enough of this shit. Liberty is what's important. Getting our people in office is what is important. Our beef with them amongst ourselves is not important at all. And I mean that, party abroad. Like I said, the Libertarian Infighting is going to be the undoing of this party. And at the rate it's going at this point, after this election comes through in 24, this is going to be a make or break for the Libertarian Party. I genuinely believe that in my whole heart. Like, it's either going to be a step forward, or the party's probably going to dismantle, honestly, because the unity's not there. Like, nobody's there. The whole "you're not a real libertarian" thing. Who's a real libertarian anyways? A real libertarian is somebody who wants to move liberty forward and not bring authoritarians and or the state involved into your business. Those are the real libertarians.
Yeah.
But you got anything you want to add before we boogie? This show got pretty long, so let's go from there, man.
Okay, yeah. So what I would say is, again, conjointly participate in any activities that you see moving liberty forward that are not part of this divide. And hey, if groups are holding meetings that you're aware of that for the state group, attend them, but don't use it as an excuse to fight or to argue. If you have something constructive to say during any comments, say something constructive. But we don't need any more division. We don't need any more mudslinging. And like I said, as far as the delegate selection convention goes, I only see one worth attending in that regard, simply because it is for the National Party, for the LNC convention. It's not for the Libertarian Party of Michigan convention. When it comes to delegate selection, we do need to resolve that before there is a delegate selection convention. I mean, not delegate, I'm sorry, I said it wrong. Candidate selection convention, a regular candidate convention. The delegate selection convention, again, there's only one that's going to be recognized whether you have two or not. The candidate election, though, we may end up in a situation, or nominations, we may end up in a situation where neither is recognized. And that would be the worst possible worlds, because then what you're going to end up happening is we won't have ballot access. We're going to all be a bunch of write-in candidates. We might as well just write in our friends or something at that point, because it's not going to count that much. It's not going to be taken seriously. It's going to be a joke if we do that. So we need to get it together, and we need to start doing it now at the individual level, at the local level. And then we need to, and like you said, if we could get people in the leaderships in the room to get this stuff hashed out in a constructive manner, that would be great. I don't know what it's going to take, but it would be great. It'll be an even year next year, so no bylaws can be changed. I don't know if one idea put out there is to have an up and down vote of everybody in the party, make it like a virtual thing where you have some way of verifying the identity of everyone voting, so we don't have people, sock puppeting a vote or whatever. Don't have people voting twice, early and often, but we have real votes. And if we can get that to be secure and get that to work, we could have maybe an up or down vote on things. That's one possibility that's been out there, but it's got to be cleaned up. We got to have this mess cleaned up sooner the better, because even if, let's say, we get it cleaned up in time that we don't have a ballot access loss, that we only have one slate of candidates put up there, we have still lost all this campaigning time. Turn on your TV. What are you hearing about? You're hearing about the major party candidates, and they already got the ball rolling. We got third party candidates who already got the ball rolling.
RFK Jr. is literally polling at over 20% right now as a walk-in independent. As a walk-in independent, he's polling at over 20%. Come on, guys. Libertarians, they never taken 20% ever. Knock this shit off.
Right.
But Scotty, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate, you giving another perspective. I'm glad we got to do this. And until next time, y'all, Viva la Libertad, carajo! Let's go, man. Let's do this. Let's get this shit done and be done. Let's do this. Let's make liberty move forward. Stop fighting, for fuck's sake. I love you guys. Peace, love, and liberty, y'all.